Okay. The other technology that was expanded here was balloon telegraph capability, and this helped with the tactical scenarios where we had tactical operators. Thaddeus Lowe was involved with this. He showed Lincoln how this capability could be used. Got to see what the battlefield looked like along the Potomac. He was very impressed with that. And they had a number of these aerostats or balloons that went up. These are the ones that are listed there: the Intrepid, the Constitution, the U.S. And they could go up at like 1,000 feet, and then they would have a telegraph in there with a cable coming down, and they could actually send Morse code, or they could use flares or flags if things did not, work out well for them. Okay, so I'll just talk about some of the things that helped in terms of some of the major engagements. General McClellan used 1862 with a three-way conversation between General Buell and General Halleck to discuss advancing plans for Nashville. That was on the Western Front. He also used it to resupply troops for bullets and shells during the Battle of Antietam. Rosecrans was able to information back and forth on the way the battle was performing in the Battle of Chickamauga. In the wilderness, General Meade used the telegraph to reinforce General Scott's attack of the Confederates. General Meade, during the Battle of the Crater, sent over 100 telegrams during the 5-hour battle. And Tecumseh Sherman, as you probably remember, basically did a ride down to Georgia, and he was able to keep in close communications with General Grant on the way down. Secretary of War Stanton Lincoln would also use it from a strategic level, keep up on the battlefield, what's going on in situational awareness. Okay, so in summary, telegraph proved an effective tool during the Civil War, which enabled the Union victory. Lincoln was, of course, a major person that took on this, and he established the USMTC, which was a major effort to manage this whole program and get an extensive network up together. Confederates lacked resources and manpower, growing policy, political issues severely limited, and they couldn't benefit really from the telegraph. And some of the technologies that we talked about were the repeaters, the cipher, and the balloon telegraph capability. And this is really, as a kind of at an end to my brief, this is really the first time this got real-time battlefield situational awareness that was realized. I have some backup slides. These are cited references. By the way, here's the American and the difference between the American Morse code and the international Morse code. You can see there's a lot of dits here, as we talked about dispersion issues. So you can see certain letters of the American Morse code were changed. These are the ones we have now in the international, but these were the original ones in the American. You can see there's a lot of dots, which caused the problem with the transatlantic cable. I had some other two good videos, and this video was kind of give you an idea of how the telegraph was used in an operational, at the operational level, with somebody that was getting orders from the tactical level, and that was a video there. And this other video was a good video on Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail, showing how the telegraph expanded. It became a very big thing. Even Thomas Edison developed his quadruplex telegraph, helped him to get his manufacturing and his Menlo Park facility up. He got resource from that, and so that was like a key enabler for him. These are a couple other books that talk about the location of different rail lines in the 1860s in both North and South. There's also this other book here is Paperback and Railroads of the Confederacy. Okay, that's basically it. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have one. If no one else does, can you hear me, Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess. Also, I mean, first off, I guess it's just you're one of your early slides in looking at the disparity between the North and the South in terms of telegraph capability, in terms of the number of operators, the amount of mileage, okay, that was wired, and that right at the beginning. It's right here. Yep. I mean, obviously, when you looked in terms of the advantage that the North had, going in, I mean, it sort of parallels sort of my history classes in terms of also looking at things like resources, available manpower. I mean, those types of things that the North was, just as the industrial base of the nation had an inherent advantage going in.
Well, yeah, but the other thing that was also very unique for the South is, they had states' rights, so that's why they couldn't control some of these telegraph companies. They could. That was another issue, and that's why, from a political standpoint, that was the other thing that really help.
Yeah, and also, I guess the other thing I never really thought about too is just, I mean, the density of population centers in the Northeast,
Mhm.
as opposed to, major population centers in the South. I mean, Richmond, Charleston, Savannah, Birmingham, New Orleans, I can't remember. I think probably those were the largest centers, and obviously they were pretty widely disparate in terms of, being able to use telegraph lines. I guess my other question just sort of is that, I mean, we're talking here about military systems, but obviously the telegraph network in the North was rather extensive. And I'm thinking sort of, how reporters use the telegraph, people such as Harper's and the Herald Tribune, and I think probably the New York Times at that time too.
Yeah,
Actually had reporters who trailed, right?
well, it was, as I think I mentioned to you, that's why Lincoln went out to New York. That was the telegraph capital of the world. So,
Yeah.
in fact, if you remember, he won the election. I think they were waiting for the New York results to come in, and it came on the telegraph. I don't know if you remember that. It was in one of the Lincoln movies that he was waiting to see if he won New York, and he did.
Yeah.
In the 1860s.
No, it's just also just intriguing when you looked at reporters,
Mhm.
in terms of, sort of, obviously lagging behind the front lines, but obviously there was telegraphic capability that was built in, beyond
yeah.
military in terms of how they used it. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was part of it too. I mean, because that was
Gettysburg
done.
was almost reported in real time. So
Mhm.
Civil War Museum. Thanks.
Yeah, that. In fact, I looked on eBay. There's a few of them left. You can go for like $20,000. They go for.
Wow.
One guy was selling one for 20,000.
Great. Thanks for the presentation, Charlie. Loved it.
Oh, good. Thanks, Dennis.
other questions or comments?
K2KLM with a question.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Um,
Brian.
I'm curious about the use of ciphers as to why they were needed at all. If the North was destroying the telegraph lines into the South, couldn't they have just cut the line between the North and the South essentially, so they couldn't be heard, or was the South tapping in somehow?
Oh yeah, well they had very the South had some rather unique ways. They had a very fine wire. All they had to do was take a wire and connect it above the line, and you couldn't even see it was such a thin wire. So they did have some issues that way.
Charlie, I see a question from John Sherevnak. I wonder if the South could identify the northern wire lines to easily disable the northern lines.
Well, I'm not sure about that because they had quite a few, and they were continuously. You got to remember they were following the troops as they went down, so they were it was kind of in real time too. Things were changing very rapidly because you remember the North, most of the battles were down south, so they were.
I remember it was the War of Northern Aggression.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, question from W2KBF.
Oh,
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. You had a diagram of how the network basically worked. It looked like there was a single wire that the telegraph signaled and everything else was
Yeah.
grounded.
Yeah, it's ground. Yes, absolutely.
It must have experimented with it. So did this work just as well as if they had run two wires, with basically a hot lead and a ground lead?
Yeah, it was just a ground. That's all. They didn't have a separate wire, one wire.
single wire.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Fred, AAB.
Right.
Always wondered about one thing. Now, I collect telegraph instruments and keys and so forth, but one thing I've never had an answer to this question. Why was it necessary to have a relay ahead of the sounder?
The relay is
Yeah, you have both a relay and a sounder.
well because
Why
the
did you
relay,
have to have the relay first driving the sounder?
well because you wanted to hear the message. You wanted to hear it.
Well, you have the sounder to hear the characters. So, but I've never understood why the relay was there first and the sounder.
I think he's saying that the sounder is inherently a relay.
Yeah, the sounder certainly produced a louder transducer, if you will. Yeah, right. You see the relay there?
Yeah. Well, that would basically what this would pull this in, and this would create your sound. Right.
Well, you don't even need a relay, really.
Oh, wait a minute. I think the reason, okay. So you could have two different batteries. You could have a circuit battery and you could have a local sounder battery, and they could be separate.
But there's a battery up here for the sounder. Yeah.
Yeah,
You see
so the second sounder itself could have a more, should we say, oomph
Louder.
type battery
Right.
to make that distinctive click that you're listening for. That's
Well,
why.
actually, if you've ever heard a telegraph relay, you could copy the code just using the relay. But the
Yeah, but
only
we're
difference
listening
is
to
that the
modern
sounder
relays.
is louder.
Yeah, but we're listening to modern telegraph relays.
No, I mean, I
Relay
could
may
put a-
have been more sensitive and less of a load on the
Right.
wire.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, Jim. That makes
Exactly.
sense.
Local
Okay, thank
regenerator.
you.
That's exactly what that is. A local
Okay.
regenerator. Good point.
Yeah.
So I have a question. The Signal Quarry. I mean, it was interesting that he got in touch with Secretary Stanton, and why? Because he was it was corporate graft or greed on the part of Stanton. But I'm curious as to what was the lesson learned, and when did the U.S. military, Army and Navy, respectively, learn from the lessons of the Civil War and whatever else followed, war in the West, et cetera, kind of get their act together on their respective tracks to create their signal divisions, respectively.
Oh,
And
you
their
gotta remember,
procedures.
this was unique time too. I mean,
Right.
we're in a war situation, so they use the USMTC was under the control. Basically, it was commercial, but they were under control, directed by the War Department. So they were under they did not hold rank or anything. They were not military. Okay.
Could they
But they-
walk away from their jobs?
They could actually support both the civilian and their the USMTC. Some of those people supported both the civilian side and the military side.
Yeah, that was always a big problem because conscripts needed to be paid.
Right.
And, there was a large turnover on both sides, particularly in the North, as the war dragged on. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So my grandmother was a hello girl in World War I. So bilingual telephone operator. She learned the Morse code while in Signal Corps, and she was never allowed to be a sending operator because she was a woman. And so a lot of those hello girls learned Morse code as a way to basically shorten the communications path, if you will, between one channel or another, between the telegraph side and the telephone side. And I'm kind of curious if you have any experience with that.
No, not really. No.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, Jim, you have a question, and then I have one from Paul Spivak, NA2PS.
Yeah, Charlie, you talked about the balloons and stuff,
Right.
but I didn't quite understand how the telegraph what did the balloon actually do?
Well, you got reconnaissance. You basically could see what was going on in the battlefield.
So they had a camera. They had a camera on the balloon.
Well, they didn't have a camera in those
People.
days. I don't think they had a camera. But people were looking out and visually seeing what's going on in the battlefield.
So they were balloons with people in them,
Right.
I
Absolutely.
presume so.
and then they had a wire coming down to the ground to send the telegraph.
Yeah,
Right.
Jim, that is true. And boy, I guess the name of the photographer is just escaping me here right now. But there are pictures of the balloons that were used in the field, particularly in the Northern Virginia campaigns. I mean, if you go back to the Civil War series back on PBS, there was examples of that showed the use of balloon. Matthew Brady, thank you very much.
Matthew Brady, thank you.
Yeah, Matthew Brady, W4GGM, my buddy. Thank you, Gordon.
Okay, so the balloon actually had an observer there
Right. Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
who sent the code down the wire to the ground.
Right. Or in some cases, if something happened, they couldn't send a telegraph, they would use flags or flares.
If only he had a Bofang up there.
Even a spark transmitter, yeah.
So before that, they would, as you say, used flares. You mentioned that, Charlie, but they also, if I remember right, Montgolfier used some of his observer balloons. They basically would throw weighted messages out of the balloons and have people below pick them up. I mean, how'd you like that job?
Yeah, Charlie, a question from Paul Spivak, NA2PS, and a comment from Sudeep the Goes in India. Okay, I mean, and Paul's comment is a really good one. If a line was cut, telegraph line was cut, how long would it take to correct the problem? Which sort of invites the question of, what was the infrastructure, in terms of looking at repairs, downstream from the telegraph operator?
Good question. I'm not sure how long it would take. It would, obviously, they were pretty on top of things though, because the USMTC had a big cadre of people and support. So I don't know what the turnaround time would be.
And what if they ambushed the maintainers?
Yeah, being deep due. Yeah. So, yeah, Bobby. And Sadiq's comment is that we read about the war, and this comment from India, is that we read about the war in school history lessons that mentioned the breakdown of communications line for the Southern forces. Now we know a lot more about the reasons. So that's a really good point.
W2NZ, please.
Tom, please.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Were the wires shielded to any degree?
I don't think so.
No,
I doubt it.
So
they wouldn't have shields.
They were copper?
I doubt
They're
it.
copper?
They're just copper wire.
They're copper wire.
As a
Okay,
matter of
okay,
fact,
Had to be, right.
It was
As a matter-
originally steel wire, though.
yeah,
We ran
I
steel
have
wire,
read.
which would break all the time.
Well, actually, iron wire. I read that the
Right,
first
yeah.
systems used iron wire. The
Yeah, that's
problem
right.
was they rusted, and the resistance became so high they had to replace the wires.
Well, the iron resistance would be much higher than copper anyway.
Yeah, of course, much higher.
Because the oxides, yeah.
Right, right.
That's why they needed 100 volts.
Well, even to run the copper wires over many miles, that would be necessary. Sure.
Yeah. And so the lesson learned was buy once, cry once, right?
Charlie, is there a way to objectively measure the impact on what they call C3I, command control communications intelligence, based on the impact of the Union Telegraph? Can we attribute it to specific things such as loss of life on the part of the enemy, ground cut recovered, speed of a campaign? I mean, is there anything we can do to objectively infer that, or at least attribute a partial influence of that? I mean, you talked in terms of like getting ammunition and things like that. That's an enabler. That's. But I'm wondering if anyone ever did a study end to end of the body of communications and as it evolved in various campaigns.
There was a big influence in the Peninsular campaign, because Lincoln was right on top of that, and he got a lot of good information to make changes. And McClellan, was rather, he had his own ideas about things, and he was, he would hold back on information. He said, "I need more troops. I need more information, more backup, and all this stuff." And he was holding back. He was very cautious.
He wasn't cautious. He was just, it was all about him. Narcissist number one.
Right. Well, plus the fact that he never shared information with Lincoln. A lot of if that's the reason why he got rid of him, why they changed they brought everything back to the War Department as far as the control of telegraph.
Yeah. McClellan was definitely, I know better. I've been trained. You're a civilian. Be quiet.
Well, he actually ran against Lincoln in 1864, as you probably know.
Yep.
Right after
Charlie, I have a question from Dave Marthouse, N2AAM. What was the practical limit before a repeater was required?
50 miles typically.
50 miles.
That's what they indicated. 50 miles was anything over 50 miles, you need a repeater. 50 miles or more.
One other question going back is that telegraph operators were enlisted men, right? Yeah. I mean, they weren't conscripts. I think they did enlist, right? If I recall correctly. I mean, what was their rank? I guess that's the other thing. Is how important were they in the infrastructure?
I think it was a combination of both, because I think there were some that were civilian also. Because you got to remember, they were part of the USMTC. So some of them were civilian, some of them were military.
Did that mean a pay differential between the two?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that with military contractors in war zones, right? I'll just pick one, Blackwater. Everybody's favorite company to hate. you know, even if you like them, they seem to hate them. But anyway, the bottom line is that they do a lot of jobs that our special forces guys do, and even our conventional forces do, and they get paid some significantly different dollars.
Well, and also it's true too, because if you looked at conscripts, is that, if my memory holds me, is that at least in the North, is that you could pay a substitute to take your place. Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, telegraph operators, I suspect, Charlie, I never thought about this too, but a lot of them may have come from the railroads. Okay. And either were drafted,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Right,
or enlisted. Okay. Particularly as the war got better and it was safer to go, safer to travel. So.
And so I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Was this
Yeah.
all one big open network where everybody could hear everything else, or was there some sort of a switchboard that made it more private? So station A could only talk to station B.
I think it was just A to B, I think.
It was a series of party lines.
Yeah, and that goes back to my question too about the non-military network as opposed to the other communication network, for example, for reporters. Is that was an entirely different network that I guess had its own permutations regarding its ability to stay up. So.
Okay, so you would need the ciphers then, if you don't know along the line, you know, how many stations are listening, right?
Yes.
You need the ciphers anyway because you don't know who's tapped in.
Well, that's true. And they, you know, there was, like I said, they used to use fine wire, and they were able to just put a fine wire over the line. They could actually, you know, they can actually, you know, collect the information. Wouldn't even see it.
Any other
Charlie,
questions or comments? Oops,
yeah,
sorry.
I just want to point out, Charlie was inspired me to read up on the topic, and the gentleman who followed Meyer as the head of the Signal Corps, he in his annual report to Congress included the fact that they could read Southern ciphers in his public report to Congress, and got himself in Dutch over that. So it seems that OPSEC, you know, was not something in people's frontal lobe at the time.
No, that's obviously not. We weren't that sophisticated.
Some things never change.
I was thinking that.
Anyway.
Hold on, where's my server in my kitchen? Hold on.
Got a Baofeng? Let's listen to the Russians. So, anyway, any other questions or comments? This was great, Charlie, and the comments are just wonderful.
Yeah. Charlie, you had 2 links at the end for additional videos. Are
right.
those are additional videos, correct?
Yes. That's it's the one that talks about how the telegraph was used in an operational environment, and then there's another one that talks about Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail. And by the way, Speedwell, I don't know if everybody's noticed, it's up in Morristown, but it's been closed since COVID. I don't think they still haven't opened up. I checked into it. I guess that's where they did a lot of some of the Revolutionary War stuff was done up there in a foundry up there.